Rob?
Well, 2 points on the email you read, which is a very thoughtful email. Appreciated it. Is one is a fear of, and there was like a phrase something like door wide open for antinomianism. So I wanted to, I just had a thought about that. And the other one is a comment about the second century church abandoning the Torah. So those are two key kind of anchors, at least in my hearing of that email, that I think are worthy of a comment, or they've at least evoked a thought for me. On the antinomianism, the fear of a door being wide open because of a subjective reading, the kind of the model for understanding the function of the Torah, in my view, what that sounds like is external and the threats of the Torah that are motivating the heart of the individual. My understanding of being a new creation in Messiah is that my heart's core purpose is Abba Father, right? Is seeking the things of God first and foremost, seeking to please Him, and seeking to be obedient. That's the core orientation and my understanding of my own life and my study of the scriptures, etc. And so the fear of antinomianism, to me, does not apply to a new creation person in the long run. It might be that someone who's born from above genuinely is under a false teacher for a time. But we've talked elsewhere what I call the law of inevitable discovery. If someone learns about Shabbat, for example, by a teacher who's also teaching flat Earth, and they latch on to the Shabbat and they find it over and over again in the Scripture, and they start actually desiring to walk more and more in the Shabbat and in their lifestyle.
Sure.
But now they have this flat Earth thing that they might also latch onto because they're new, right? They're new, they're naive, they don't have the discernment. But I believe that the genuine disciple of Yeshua will eventually sort out and grow in discernment and say, okay, this, but not that, right? And so I don't think, I think that applies to this fear of becoming a person who doesn't even, says the law is done away with. Now, that ties into this second point about the early church abandoning the Torah. The model that Yeshua gives is different than that. That's not a historical timeline that Yeshua prophesied. The historical map that Yeshua spoke would happen is that his followers would be increasingly excluded. And this is even Lawrence Schiffman, who's an Orthodox, Jew who's also an academic. He does a lot of writing and he presents at SBL all the time. He argues in his book, Who Was a Jew? He says that the early Jewish believers in Yeshua were halakhically excluded. In other words, the rabbis slowly developed a halakhic system that was more and more unappealing and naturally excluded anyone who believed in Yeshua. And so, and who was in power? At this time, the followers in Yeshua were marginalized. They did not have a lot of, they didn't have political power. They were just small networks of families and individuals. And synagogue communities. So we have to understand that there's a lot of historical things going on. It's not so simple now where we can read this text and this text from the second century, like the Epistle of Barnabas or something, and we draw a line and saying, see, here's the path of antinomianism that the church took. What, in fact, we do have is we have to recognize that on the ground, it's probably much, much more complex than that. We have communities undergoing trauma. You have teachers that are being maybe hauled off and put to death. So now you have, fledgling communities that have living faith, but they do not have the leisure or the resources that we have now to compare scripture with scripture and to, it's just a completely different world. So in my view, it's unfair. There have been some unfair characterizations of how the early church became anti-Torah. I understand why people are pointing that out, and I think I'm not telling people not to investigate it. I'm just saying I think we need to be a little more patient and a little more kind in assuming the best of those disciples from every generation who are true disciples of Yeshua, doing the best they can, given the limited resources, traumatic community experience. I think God, I believe he's faithful. And
no doubt.
Yeah. And so in the surviving texts only give us a fragment of the story. And we know, just like with this whole Glenn Beck thing, we see how people's imagination can take a text and run with it and build entirely fortified worlds, kingdoms. I mean, you think of like the Mormon world in America today, and this shows the power of people's belief in a story. The story can be totally false, but people will believe it. And so, anyway, that I probably said too much, but those are just some thoughts that come up on that.